joining us. This is Greg Lynn, who will be presenting in our UT SOA lecture series. I'm Kirsten Strake-Anderson, and let's get right to it.
Sounds good.
One of my favorite questions to ask architects and professionals is where they find joy, and particularly unexpected joy in their work. Where do you find your joy?
Well, I'm very spoiled, and I don't know why, because I don't have like a big safety net or any reason to feel like I could take risks. But if I'm really not liking something, I don't do it. And I've never done really anything that I thought was a bad idea in order to promote my career or do something or have another opportunity. And I think it's very typical in architecture, from like who you decide to work for, to where you decide to live, to then what kind of jobs you do, and all kinds of things where you make, I'm not saying I don't make compromises, I love making compromises, but I never do anything that I feel is a bad idea. So honestly, I take a lot of joy in practically everything I do, or else I stop doing it pretty rapidly. In terms of unexpected joy, I became CEO of what's turned into a much larger company than my architecture firm has ever been. And I did that just because I care about it. And there's all kinds of challenges and opportunities there that I didn't expect, and it's really fun. I love making decisions and sticking with them, and I love having to do that. And lately I have to make 2 or 3 decisions per day that are life and death decisions. But it's really fun to do that and then commit to it. But mostly it's usually the people. I really will sometimes have an intuition about somebody that I'm going to work with, whether it's in my office or a client or a consultant. And what's really the most fun is just getting to work with smart people and finding out all kinds of things you don't know.
Really fun. It does sound really fun. Doing things that you don't have passion behind is probably not the best way to go.
Yeah, I think the great thing about architecture is it's the greatest field to be in if you approach it that way. I mean, it can be really crushing too. There's a lot of downsides to architecture, but if you want to make something out of it and you have an imagination, it's really, you can have a lot of fun.
So that kind of relates to an entrepreneurial spirit in architecture and how it kind of has its own, creative spirit, which asks questions that aren't typical,
Right.
And so, that's what this creative director or CEO, CCO,
Yep.
maybe, position is centered around. And I just wonder I know your background is actually not in just architecture. It's in philosophy and environmental design, if I'm correct. And how do you feel that variety of education experience has helped you and informed you and led you onto the path that you're on right now?
Well, so it would be important biographically for me to just admit or say that my mother had a strange identification with Frank Lloyd Wright's mother. So it wasn't that she wanted to have a son like Frank Lloyd Wright, it was that she wanted to be like Frank Lloyd Wright's mother.
Okay.
And so before I was born, I was going to be an architect, and spent my whole childhood visiting Frank Lloyd Wright buildings and studying architecture on family vacations, and learned to draw and draft and construct perspectives and things before I even went to high school. So when I went to college at Miami University, where it was really a 4-year architecture degree, but it was called Bachelor of Environmental Design.
Okay.
But we had architecture studios first semester freshman year. So I should have had 8, maybe I did actually have 8 architecture studios, but honestly I was bored out of my mind, because I was learning a skill set that I already knew, and there was a philosophy program where we could take all of our other required classes that I'd enrolled in, and I really loved that. And I actually was thinking of dropping the architecture degree and just getting a liberal arts degree. And I'm glad I didn't, but I ended up maybe spending a little more time on the liberal arts degree, which became a philosophy degree. So, but mostly I was studying architecture all the way through undergraduate school, and then went straight to graduate school with no time off. And so I was always driven about it. I was always slightly ambivalent, and probably still remain slightly ambivalent if it's where all action is. But I think in students and colleagues, it's very important to not be too vocational about architecture, but to have other educational experience and especially other life experiences, because architects are, there's all kinds of things you do in architecture, but at probably the highest level, you're really meant to be a thought leader and an advocate for citizens. And to do that, I think you need more than just studio training.
Right. Thank you. You speak a little bit about being an advocate of people, of the people who live in buildings. And that brings me sort of to the question of what you feel architecture can add to the future of people. What do you think the challenges are that architecture can approach? Because in so many ways we're asked to solve social problems and environmental problems and things like that, but where does architecture actually fall in those realms of problem solving?
Yeah. So one of the things, of many things I learned from working for Peter Eisman, one that he was always, at the time fairly unique in saying, was that we would always have to rewrite the program before we started the project. And Peter would also, I would say, lobby and advocate for himself for projects that he knew were coming up. Like, he didn't just, wait and have a business development person say, we need to put in for the following projects. Peter would start talking to a university president and finding out about a museum and really kind of working hard to get early in the conversation. And that's one of the things that gets harder and harder to do. I mean, something like a building, the site has usually been acquired and selected. The financing has usually been put in place. A lot of times the general contractor has already been hired. The program has been written, and they come to the architect really late, very downstream. So it's very hard to advocate, for anything larger than just providing a design service. And frankly, the field over the last 3 or 4 decades has gotten more concerned with risk than they are responsibility. And so instead of owning more of the process, everybody wants to own less and less and less and take on less and less risk. And frankly, there's no rewards without risk. And what you really get paid for is risk.
Right.
People don't really need to pay an architect for their specialization, because that's a lot of other entities have that. And so it's tough. You have to almost find a different way to practice or have a different relationship with your clients.
You bring up an interesting part, which is to kind of get the job before the job comes up. And there's a title in our career right now, which is floating around, which is design strategist,
Yep.
which does in fact come before SD, DD, CD,
Yep.
and everything like that. Do you speak to that or your experience of that type of position, or if that's sort of the beginning of this new element?
Well, it is. I mean, I really don't know the percentages, but a lot of the graduates you're going to find will be sitting across the table from you as clients' representatives, as construction managers, as working for the builders and the general contractor anymore. There are probably as many architects involved on the other side of the design as there are on the design side. So, and that's in Europe, in Asia, in the US, that's pretty much global. So it's really not like the responsibility has disappeared. It's just been shifted in different places. So a degree in design strategy, it's probably a good idea, but I don't know if I would want to separate design strategy out from like basic services.
Right.
So that part's tough. In the end, it really comes also down to how you get paid. And so a lot of times you have to reimagine that. With the last 3 of 5 projects, we've ended up participating in the company, meaning that we defer some design fees into ownership of the company, and then we're also motivated to do a really good job because
Right.
it's, anything we do is something that we're going to either benefit or not from. So
Right.
I think it's really in flux.
Right, yeah.
It's a time of change right now. And
Would you say that maybe by taking on more risk, more responsibility, that the agency that an architect has expands?
sure.
And so the more that you form these relationships with clients, or the more that they can see you as a consultant, the more agency there is, and it's not just about winning the design competition. Kind of,
Yep.
it's really about that conversation with potential clients and things like that.
Yep. And it is happening at a scale. I don't know if you're aware of like a company like Katera, but a lot of the best people I know from Autodesk recently have gone over to work for Katera, and I know a lot of very smart people from Silicon Valley are focusing on the building industry, and it's, the building industry's optimization is the same today as it was in 1960. Same amount of waste, same amount of on-time delivery. It hasn't changed. And so the world is looking at the biggest industry on earth, which is the building industry, and they're saying it's really like 30 to 50% inefficient. Can't software fix that, is what they think. But what's happening is you get a company like Katera, which is now totally vertical. So they do all the pre-design, they do all the due diligence, they do all the design, they do all the architectural services, all the structure. They have a factory where they build everything, and then they assemble it all on site. It's a totally integrated vertical model, and they're going to save time, they're going to save money. It's very new corporate strategy where you take care of every part of the whole process, but it's a little bit off-putting. I think there's a lot of very smart, talented people there, so don't get me wrong, but it's going to make it really hard to have a small practice.
Right. Actually, that point brings me to a question of the question of generalist versus specialist in architecture, and how these corporations are able to acquire specialists in-house, and how that changes or is differentiated against the generalist or the design architect who doesn't before or after, but rather
Yep.
just that initial design phase.
I don't know. Again, I really don't know any facts about any of that, and I would be uncomfortable saying anything other than just, I'm much more the person that brings design to the project and collaborates with a much bigger team, but the design I bring is highly specialized and actually understands the value of design really well. And there's a lot of jobs, but I mean, for me, that's a very, it's both lucrative and satisfying and culturally significant. So that's why I like to do that. But you do always have to bring something else with you. It's not just about like a signature or a style. Like when I was a student, there were a lot of people that were just, sending a design overseas to another architect and not being involved in the execution. But more recently, I've seen some of the best architects in the field, like Zaha would always say that she would be willing to take a low fee to just do design because she would know that the local architect wouldn't be able to execute her design, and they would come back and hire her to give advice on how to execute the design she did. And that was their business model. I think it still is. So they'll have a very low bid at the front end, but they end up having it all work out because they become design assist. Frank Gehry does something very similar, actually. When they work with an executive architect, they're working as design assist through the whole way, and the biggest problem is you train your local architect to become a competitor.
Interesting.
So, because they learn all your systems and process.
Interesting. Yeah, the CD phase of a project is so much a portion of the construction budget, but how that process is worked out is really kind of based on tradition, a traditional sense of creating CDs.
And that even the idea of CDs as being having a lot of labor associated, if you design a project correctly, and you're not having to produce stacks and stacks of drawings, but figuring out how to build by talking directly to both fabricators and machines, a lot of those CD decisions are being made in even concept design,
right?
Let alone schematics. So it's not like the old days where you do, a dozen sheets, that would be outlines,
right,
that would then get kind of information filled in at DD, and then you cut a whole bunch of details.
Right.
I don't know anybody who can successfully work that way at any kind of a scale anymore. So, and that's tough because it means you're having to do a whole lot at the schematic design phase, but you're not really being paid for it, and you're floating that for your entire team, including all your consultants, until you start to get into the CD phase.
Right. Obviously this begs the question of what digital tools even do for us anyway, except make more work for us on one end and less work for us on the other.
Yeah, I think
and how it's being used.
When I started, like as a student, the idea was the computer would be a machine to make drawings, which was kind of not the right idea. It still gets used that way by a lot of people, but it's better at doing things than just
there's more things
producing
to do.
drawings.
Right, gathering building information and building software for buildings and things like that. But it's just a couple things. But,
yeah. No, I think Moshe Softy, Frank Gehry, Architectonica. A lot of offices have larger software companies where they're into making software than they had architecture offices. Gehry Technologies was much bigger than Gehry Architects.
Right, they were modifying software for their own use, so it was easier for them, correct? And then they decided to commodify it at some point.
Well, they both sold software, and they also provided technology services to other architects. That's actually what most of their revenue was.
Interesting. Well, the business of architecture is broadening every day. Well, thank you so much. We have to go to your lecture series now.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you for your answers.
Well, thanks for the great questions.
Thank you.